Good morning and welcome to the regular public meeting of the Henry County Board of Commissioners for 9 a.m. Tuesday, February 7, 2012. At this time, I would like to call the meeting to order. Before I ask for an acceptance of the agenda, we have one item that we need to amend the agenda and add, and Commissioner Holder would like to make an appointment to the Recreation Board, and we will look at that or consider that after the approval of the minutes on your agenda this morning. With that change being made, I will look for someone to make a motion for the acceptance of the agenda. Motion by Mr. Holder, second by Mr. Holmes. All in favor? Motion carries 5-0. I would like to thank Commissioner Arletta for chairing the meeting yesterday while I was downtown at the Capitol, and I understand he did an outstanding job, and I always hate to miss a meeting, but unfortunately when the General Assembly is meeting, you never know what type of bills they're going to come up with that could potentially impact the county, so I had to make a trip down there yesterday to meet with some of the Senate leaders on one of those bills. But thank you, Mr. Arletta, for doing a good job with the meeting yesterday. I heard quite a number of compliments about that. With that being said, we're going to move on to social services. The first item this morning is a resolution requesting approval of an amendment to the DHR Coordinated Transportation Contract for transportation services to elderly and disabled individuals. Our presenter is David Williamson, Transit Director, Exhibit Number 5. Good morning.
Good morning. As you know, Henry County has been a provider of DHS transportation for the elderly and disabled individuals here in the county for the past 12 years. And the Georgia Department of Human Services anticipated that we will need additional funding to cover the expense of those trips for the remainder of the year. They're requesting to amend the contract to add $11,899.90 to the current contract, which will bring the total to $492,287.13. We request approval, please.
Does any board member have a question or comment pertaining to this item? If not, you have before you a resolution pertaining to the amendment of the contract, and I'll entertain a motion. Motion to approve by Mr. Holder, second by Mr. Arletta. All in favor? Motion carries 5-0. Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on to public safety, we have a resolution requesting approval to purchase additional equipment required for the radio communications system to accommodate the new 911 building. Our presenter is Rod Gray.
Yes,
they have your name misspelled here. Our purchasing director, Exhibit Number 6.
Well, thank you. Good morning, Madam Chair, Commissioners. I have one item this morning. It's a purchase request for E911. On June 22, 2010, the BOC approved a resolution number 10-131, which authorized E911 to proceed with the public safety radio switch upgrade with Harris Corporation at a cost of $1,623,965.79 to accommodate the requirements of the new E91 facility. Additional cables, a terminal, and racks and with shelves are needed. The recommendation is to purchase the required additional equipment from Harris Corporation by using an existing Georgia Technology Authority contract at a cost of $55,820. Funds are available in the E91 budget.
Does any board member have a question or comment pertaining to this item? Okay, if not, you have a resolution before you, and okay, I see here. Never mind, I had a question, but it's been answered. If there's no questions from the board, you have a resolution before you awarding the purchase to Harris Corporation Distributors in Georgia Loudon Communications. I'll entertain a motion. Motion to approve by Mr. Arletta, second by Mr. Holmes. All in favor? Motion carries 5-0. Thank you. For those of you who are in the room this morning, we are having some audio difficulties, and so I just asked if you are making a presentation at the podium, if you could speak up a little bit louder, and also ask the board members if you have questions to please speak up on that as well. The next item is under Finance. We have a resolution requesting approval of a budget amendment for fiscal year 2011-2012. Our presenter is Mike Bush, Finance Director, and that's Exhibit Number 4.
Good morning, Madam Chair and Board.
Good morning.
We had a presentation yesterday going over the line items for the change in the budget, and we're here this morning to ask for approval of the mid-year budget amendment.
Does any board member have a question or comment pertaining to this item? If not, you have before you a resolution approving the budget amendment, and I'll entertain a motion. Motion to approve by Mr. Stamey, second by Mr. Holmes. All in favor? Motion carries 5-0. Thank you. Moving on to Planning and Zoning Services, we have a resolution requesting approval to amend the contract with Harbin's Mechanical for supplemental work to be done at the jail. Our presenters are Michael Harris, Planning and Zoning Services Division Director, and Mike Keeble, Facilities Maintenance Director, Exhibit Number 8. Good morning. Looks like you're going solo here.
Yes, ma'am. Henry County was awarded, the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant in the amount of $751,000 to upgrade energy efficiency in existing county buildings. And to date, those funds have been used to upgrade lighting in several buildings and upgrade the entire HVAC systems at the Locust Grove Recreation Center, 40 Atlanta Street, 66 Veterans Drive, and at Fire Station Number 1. Most recently, we went to upgrade the HVAC system at the jail, and as the work progressed, it became evident that additional work beyond the original scope was required. The staff had the contractor, Harbin Mechanical, provide a quote for additional works for the items needed. Facilities maintenance personnel have worked with the contractor to develop the amended scope of work. The list of additional work items that was then forwarded to the Department of Energy to get confirmation for the additional items to see if they were eligible for reimbursement under the Energy Conservation Grant. January 3rd of 2012, we received notification from the Department of Energy that 3 of the 4 items were eligible for reimbursement, and the Sheriff's Office has agreed to cover the cost for the remaining item, which is repairs to the leaks in the domestic water piping. The quote also included a $9,361 credit due from Harbin for an air handler that didn't meet reimbursement. We have reviewed the proposed list of additional work items, and we recommend the approval of amending the contract with Harbin's Mechanical for an additional $51,371.57.
And all of this money will come from the energy efficiency grant?
No, ma'am. Item number, I believe it is 3, is going to be covered. No, item number 2, the sheriff said he would cover that. He has money in his budget. 3 of the 4 are covered by the grant, and the sheriff is going to pay for the additional for item number 2.
Gotcha. Does any board member have a question or comment pertaining to this item? Mr. Arletta?
Just the obvious, I guess, and that is what was the item that caused it to be missed in the original bid, that it had to come back with
Once we
additional
got
work?
into the scope of work and started tearing more stuff apart, it was evident that we needed more work done than the original scope of work. It was a major project. Once we started tearing stuff apart, we started finding more stuff that wasn't evident at first, when we first went in. A lot of it, 2 of the items were additional design that had to be done.
Okay. And on the credit that we're receiving on that air handling unit, is that something they're coming and picking back up, or something we're keeping?
Oh, no, sir. They ate the cost of that.
Okay.
It didn't fall under, everybody thought it fell under the criteria, and when we sent it to the Department of Energy, they kicked it out. And then between the supplier and the contractor, they decided to just eat the cost on that one for us.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? If not, you have before you a resolution to amend our current contract with Harbin's Mechanical, and I'll entertain a motion. Motion by Mr. Holmes to approve. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Bowman. All in favor? Motion carries 5-0. Thank you. All right, moving on to our public hearing. The Landing Church of God of McDonough requests an ordinance amendment to Section 4.03.14E2 A and C regulating churches and similar religious facilities regarding the ownership of accessory uses within a church or religious facility in accordance with Section 12.02.11 and 12.03.00 of the Henry County Unified Land Development Code. Our presenter on that is Stacy Jordan, Exhibit Number 9. Good morning.
Good morning, Madam Chairman.
And before we begin, I'm going to ask the county attorney, up until Sunday, I was a member of this particular church making this request for the amendment to the ULDC, but what they're asking for affects every church in Henry County, not just an action specifically to that one. Should I recuse myself, or can I still chair this part of the meeting?
You can still chair the meeting.
Thank
Madam
you.
Chair.
Madam Chairman, Commissioners, the current language of the Unified Land Development Code requires accessory uses of churches and similar religious facilities to be owned and operated by the church or similar religious facility. The applicant's request would provide for churches and similar religious facilities to lease or otherwise allow accessory uses to be operated by a user other than the church or similar religious facility. The staff and the Zoning Advisory Board recommends approval of the request as shown on your executive summary and also in the attached resolution. I'd be pleased to answer questions.
Basically, I think what brought this subject up is you have, because of the economy, you have churches that meet during their regular meeting times, and you have other churches that are now meeting in the same facility. So you may have 2 or 3 churches sharing the same facilities, but our ordinance only allows for the one church to utilize the facility. Is that correct?
That is a common understanding, and that's not exactly what the applicant was concerned about.
Okay.
The use of a property that's appropriately zoned for a church can be used by multiple congregations with no problem under the current ULDC. Furthermore, if the church property is zoned commercial, the commercial uses that are permitted under that zoning district are simply permitted, in addition to the church. What the applicant was concerned about are the accessory uses. For example, a daycare within a church or a school and so forth. And these various uses are listed in the staff report that's part of your exhibits. Before the Unified Land Development Code was adopted, the zoning code didn't provide language to guide us. So the Unified Land Development Code says quite specifically which uses may be allowed, but it gave the stipulation that those accessory uses had to be owned and operated by the church or similar religious facility. This ordinance amendment would allow for those uses to be leased out or operated by an entity other than the church. And the staff, having spoken with the county attorney, recommends approval of that as listed in your resolution exhibit.
Thank you. Does any board member have a question or comment pertaining to this item? Mr. Holder?
Mr. Jordan, as far as the structures that are in question, the accessory structures, do any of those have tax-exempt status? The reason and I think you know where I'm coming from, is because if the church is enjoying a church-exempt status for their, we'll say, sanctuary, or whatever is allowable for the tax-exempt,
Yes.
and then they are allowed to have as an income source leasing out a portion of it,
Right.
then that's not really fair to other property owners that are non-religious. So,
Yes, sir. If you'll reference the staff report in page 3, there's what we have called an Appendix A, and there are several issues that we had considered when evaluating this request. And one of those is just what you brought up, Commissioner, that income-producing properties cannot be tax exempt. And so what we had determined was that the exemption status is determined by the Board of Assessors and not the Unified Land Development Code. So while the county will make that determination, that will be done using a different venue than this Unified Land Development Code, particularly the Board of Assessors, and it does not have to be addressed at this time and for this ordinance amendment.
Understood, understood. Okay. As long as it's addressed, that's the key. Okay.
Mr. Bowman?
I know from personal experience, I own a piece of property, or I still own a piece of property that a church leased out part of my property at one time, and of course, I still had to pay the property taxes on it. Is that what you're referring to, or is that?
Church-owned property. Where it's church-owned property that would have tax-exempt status.
Oh, okay.
We'll use an Eagles Landing Baptist Church as an example.
Okay.
Because I remember back in years past that there was a lawsuit that arose simply on that against Henry County. If they own the property, and in this case, we're going to lease a rec facility out or one of their properties for whatever the reason, and it held a tax-exempt status, would it still fall under it? And Stacy just addressed that by saying, no, a revenue-generating use would basically do it, but it would be done through the assessors, and I can understand that.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Would the zoning make a difference, Stacy, if it's non-commercial?
It's the use more so than the zoning.
But the zoning would allow them to do more options within the facilities. And what is the present zoning on this piece of property?
That's another common understanding that may be misunderstood. The applicant is a particular local church, but this ordinance amendment covers any church in Henry County. And so at this time, I'm actually not quite certain what the Landing Church is zoned.
Mr. Arletta?
You mentioned daycare as being one of the items that they could lease out.
Yes, sir.
And there are a lot of, or at least rules, regulations, ordinances, and so on. To the extent it was their daycare, they were responsible for it, and then they lease it, I would assume that the responsibility of compliance with those codes goes with the lessee, or does it stay with the church?
Well, that's one thing. Originally, the applicant had requested that the particular sentence be stricken that said the owner of the primary use shall obtain any licenses required to conduct the accessory use. And the staff and the zoning board recommended alternate language to simply say that the operator of the accessory use shall obtain any licenses required to conduct the accessory use. So that does put the requirement onto the operator of the accessory use.
Are there any other questions or comments pertaining to this item? All right, if not, this is a public hearing, and I'd like to ask if there's anyone in the audience who wishes to speak concerning this particular amendment. Okay. All right, if not, if there are no further questions or comments from the board, you do have before you a resolution to amend this code section of the Unified Land Development Code.
This item is actually brought forward by the applicant, so the applicant would likely need to come forward and present their side as well. It wasn't presented by staff, wasn't brought up by staff. It was brought up by the applicant in this case.
Okay, I don't see anybody here.
Okay. I think the applicant is here.
Oh, wait a minute, okay.
Yeah.
Good morning. If you could please state your name and address for the record.
Hi, I'm Eric Aiken, 426 Wingfoot Drive, McDonough, Georgia. And I am the agent for the applicant. I'm also a commercial broker, specialized in churches and daycares. And this issue came to my attention about summer of last year. And we have a number of churches who are in desperate need of supplemental income. And leasing daycares is a great option for them. The particular applicant, they have a 12,000 square foot daycare center. They ran it privately. It's now vacant. And by generating income from a licensee, from a leasee, will afford them the opportunity to sustain.
Does any board member have a question? Okay. All right, thank you.
Madam Chair, I have a question for the county attorney, LaTanya. On the I guess on what pages it's not numbered, but it says number D here, it says private academic schools, should it be taken private and put Christian there? Because the religious status is what's given in the break on the taxes, correct? Not really necessarily private?
Commissioner, if I may, while the county attorney is looking, I believe you're referencing the first page of the staff report, and it does list all the various accessory uses, but I just want to point out that this particular section of our code is not what's being amended. It's actually further on in the code. These accessory uses are listed for your convenience, but they don't intend to change this list, and that it wasn't advertised as such.
Well, I think from the standpoint of religious versus non-religious, if a church is tax exempt under the law, if they lease a portion of their facility to a non-exempt entity, then that property will become taxable at that point. It will not be tax exempt. But this gives them the opportunity to understand that, yes, you can do this, but you're going to lose your tax exemption on that portion of the property because it is not solely for religious purposes. So that would take care of a non-religious use if, let's say, a secular school wanted to locate on the premises and not a Christian school, then that tax exempt status would go away in that case. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely, yeah. Thank you, Stacy. Tanya?
Yes, sir.
Anyone else with a question or comment on that? All right, and are there any public comments at this time? Good morning.
Good morning. I'm Sandra Vincent. I reside at 130 Bennington Court, McDonough, Georgia. I'm not here in an official capacity. I simply want to commend staff for the work that they've done with the churches in terms of getting this legislation to a point where it is agreeable on both parties. In one of the previous meetings, there was a lot of discussion around the fact that several churches stood to lose if legislation were passed that would prevent them from allowing other parties to rent or to lease property for an accessory purpose. So I just ask today that you would support this legislation as presented by staff. A great deal of work has been done with the city attorney. We have a number of ministries here today, and a lot of ministries which have actually been engaged in this process in expressing concerns. The whole issue of tax exemption, on a federal level, churches are still mandated to meet certain requirements. So at the end of the day, if they are taking in income, then that income has to be reported. So it ceases to be a concern. But I thank you for your consideration.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stacey.
Any other questions or comments pertaining to this item? All right, if not, you have before you a resolution to amend the ULDC and regarding the accessory uses of churches and similar religious facilities and other purposes, and I will entertain a motion. Motion to approve by Mr. Holmes. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Stamey. All in favor? Motion carries 5-0.
Thank you.
Moving on to an ordinance to amend Appendix B, Administration of Building and Technical Codes, Section 103.1.1 of the Unified Land Development Code. Our presenter is Bert Foster, Building Department Director, Exhibit Number 10, and this, too, is a public hearing. Good morning.
Good morning, Madam Chairman and members of the Board. I'm back before you this morning to discuss an ordinance amendment pertaining to portable structures and exemptions from the permitting process. This change was brought to the Board last month for discussion and was tabled in order to give staff time to reconfigure the changes to include portable structures that are placed on existing foundations. As such, we've added a section to exemption number 1 that allows portable structures that are attached to a permitted and approved permanent foundation to be exempt from the permitting process. Please note that the foundation itself will need to have a permit and be approved. The remainder of the exhibit is as it was back in January. I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Does any board member have a question or comment pertaining to this item? Mr. Holder?
Mr. Foster, the question that I have, we still are limiting it to a 10 by 10 or 120 square foot building that doesn't need a permit, is that correct?
That is included, but actually we're eliminating any portable prefab structure from the permitting
I
process.
saw that, but nevertheless, you're still capping it at 120 square feet.
No, sir. The size goes away if it's portable. Any structure 120 square feet or smaller is exempt, whether it's on a permanent foundation, conventional construction, prefab, whatever. Portable structures that are by nature portable or on a permitted permanent foundation will be exempt as well if this amendment passes.
But if it was a 12 by 12 or 14 by 14, if it was on a permitted slab, it's still okay?
Provided it's a prefab building and not
Correct.
conventional construction,
That's
yes,
my
sir.
point. Okay.
Any other questions or comments? All right, if not, this is a public hearing. I'd like to ask if there's anyone in the audience who wishes to speak in regards to this amendment. Are there any further questions or comments from the board? If not, you have before you a resolution to amend Section 103.11, and I'll entertain a motion.
Move to approve.
Motion to approve by Mr. Bowman and a second by Mr. Holder. All in favor? Motion carries 5-0. Thank you. Moving on to another public hearing, we have an ordinance amendment to amend Chapter 4, Site Design Standards, Section 4.04.02, Major and Minor Subdivisions, Chapter 12, Administrative Procedures, Section 12.02.03C, Action following completion of improvements, and Appendix A, definitions in accordance with Section 12.02.11 and 12.03.00 of the Henry County Unified Land Development Code. Our presenter is Sherry Hobson Matthews, Planning and Zoning Director, and that's Exhibit Number 11. I wish y'all could make those a little lengthier so we could get more information. That's quite an introduction.
Thank you. Good morning, Madam. Good morning, Madam Chair and board members. The request before you this morning, I certainly won't reread the agenda item, but it has been brought to staff's attention through a number of requests that have come in for lot divisions that there is no clear definition for a major and minor subdivision. The way the code currently reads is if it's not a major subdivision, it's a minor subdivision, but it doesn't define what a major is and what a minor is. So what staff has done is we've checked with other jurisdictions to see what they look at and how they define a major and minor subdivision. And what we have recommended and what was recommended for approval by the Zoning Advisory Board is to define a minor subdivision as all subdivisions that are limited to but do not exceed 5 lots. Now, the caveat with that is if you're not putting in public streets, there is no infrastructure going in, then you will be defined as a minor subdivision. Anything that is 6 or more lots will be defined as a major subdivision. We've also gone in, and if it is considered a minor subdivision, there are certain regulations that you don't have to follow as far as the submittal of your plans. And so what we've done, and I know it may be kind of hard to follow, is every item that has an asterisk by it in your exhibit means that those items are not a requirement, those items are a requirement for submittal with a minor subdivision plat. Keep in mind, if it's a final plat that someone is coming in, it would still go through the exact same process as it does today. So the difference is minor is 5 or less, major is 6 or more. If there are any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer.
Mr. Bowman?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Had a particular instance, and it seems, I'm really trying to understand, had personal interest in this particular situation, in that I bought some property, and I think a lot of people know about some property, and I decided that I was going to give away some lots. I'll cut out some property and give it to my kids. And in doing so, I had to go through this drawn-out process that I was creating a subdivision, and all of the lots fronted on Airline Road. There was no new driveways, yes. There were no new roads, no new instances. It seems to me that a landowner ought to be able to cut out a lot and give it to his children without having to go through $3,000 or $4,000 worth of drawings and other things and delays to call it a minor subdivision. I don't know what else you would call it, but, you know, it just, to me, that doesn't make any sense. The lots were not sold, they were given away. And I just have, I have an issue with the fact that a grandfather or a father can't give a lot or several lots away to his kids without having to go through several $1,000s worth of expenses. And I'd like to know what we can do about that, because I know I'm not the only guy here that owns property that wants to leave some or give some to his kids without having to go through a whole lot of unnecessary expense. And what in here covers that?
Okay. That's certainly what we've heard from quite a few citizens, and it's been the same situation where they've had a parcel of land and they just want to subdivide it to their family members. What we think we've tried to do here is to somewhat alleviate you having to go through a long, drawn-out process. Today, if you were to come in, if this is approved, then you can come in, subdivide the property. It will still be classified as a minor subdivision if you're splitting it up to 5 times. Now, if you're not putting in any type of roads, any type of infrastructure, you're just doing independent driveways, then it would still be designated as a minor subdivision. The only thing that we're still required to look at on the plans, and there are some things like as-built drawings that you would have in the past been required to submit. All of those requirements have now gone away. So anything that's in this list that has an asterisk, it is no longer required for a minor subdivision. The only thing we look for is a name of a subdivision if you want to give it a name. And it can be, and I'll just use your example, Bowman Estates. We can call it that, or you can.
Said that.
And but I'm following your example, so you can call it whatever you want to call it, but we need to know where the property is located, and a lot of times we have to have this information for E911 purposes in case there's an emergency. We're able to plot this individual or those individual lots so that if someone needs to get to that site, that they'll know where the property is located. So it's more of a informational purposes for us on the minor side. Now, for a major subdivision, you would go through the process.
I understand the major. I have no issues with the major. All right, but doesn't the fact that I've deeded that piece over, and once that's recorded, doesn't that take care of 911, or does it not?
Well, the only way that you can get it recorded is you have to have a stamp of approval from the county. So your recording would happen once you bring that plat in and we approve it for recording.
Right.
Then you'll take it to the courthouse. The courthouse will actually assign it a plat book and page number, and then it goes back to get the address assigned to it.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. And I'm not sure if Michael or Bert wants to add to that, if I left anything
And you're
out.
right, you know, our goal was to minimize the process as related to individual lots that are being handed down from family members to family members within reason. You know, back during the boom times, we had some people who would try to usurp the system by doing that same type of thing. And so we wanted to make sure we had specific regulations in place to be able to address those that are for, you know, family members and again, 5 and less, and those, but still be able to have the same regulations in place for a major subdivision or 6 plus.
But Mike, say a guy had 6 kids and he decided he wanted to do it. Would he be able to come in and maybe appeal the fact that it's only for 5? I mean, is there an opportunity for? I mean, you know, I happen to have 4. I mean, is there an opportunity for someone to be able to come in and say, look, I've got, you know, 5 grandkids?
Not based on
not trying to circumvent.
No, you're right. We had to come up with a number. You know,
Yes.
what we came up with was that 5 splits. You know, because beyond that, you know, right now the provision doesn't cover beyond. If you want to have those minor for beyond for more than 5, it wouldn't allow for that at this time.
But they could appeal to the board, and
I'm sure, yeah.
And if that type of situation arose.
Ken, is there any way to insert language for related and unrelated? I mean, you can divide 5 times for people you may not even know, but if there's some type of family relationship, then
Yeah, I think that would be a challenge, in all honesty, Madam Chair. just making that distinction between those who are related versus non-related. Yeah, from the cases that we've seen, Sherry and Burke can certainly probably chime in as well. Usually it is on the case where you have a few family members and you're looking to divide or give some land to your family members. We think this adequately addresses those additional expenses that really shouldn't apply in those cases. So we think we address it. If it should come up, we start beginning having those issues, we can certainly as a staff sit down and look at it and perhaps at that point look at amending our language. But we certainly we feel comfortable that this should address the concerns that we've had that's been expressed to us in the past.
What was the reason for the original ordinance?
The original
ordinance with regards to handing down property?
Well, the original ordinance, the problem we had with this, it didn't make a distinction for minor subdivisions and set regulations in place for how do you, we had one set of regulations on a subdivision. And it was this matter of, once you met the requirement of a subdivision, or definition of a subdivision, then you were required to do follow all the criteria that was listed. What we've done now is, we've made a distinction between major and minor. So if you only meet the requirements of a minor subdivision, that list is reduced as far as what needs to be done. Again, like as-built drawings that Sherry mentioned, those things would not be required in those cases. But again, we had one list of requirements associated with subdivisions, and you had just one definition of what subdivision was.
Mr. Arletta?
When I read some of these, and they're excluded with the asterisk, and I'll just take one, Q. Verification by the county that the soil erosion and sedimentation control for the subdivision is in compliance with the approved soil erosion and sediment control plan. I'm trying to understand why, because there's only 5, something that is necessary along those lines is going to be excluded. And I could take the same thing for P, or I could say the same thing for R. They seem to be items that are of, R is verification by the Henry County Water Sewer Authority that all requirements have been met, including submission of required documentation and inspections. And again, it would seem to me that those are the types of things that, when you're building something, doing something, are requirements. So I guess to help me to understand the logic of why they would be excluded, and you look like you got the answers, that's great.
Yes, sir, you're absolutely right. Those will still be required, but because we're dealing with individual lots, the erosion control standards will be met when they come in and apply for the building permit. As part of that building permitting process, they need to apply for a residential land disturbance, which will show their compliance with the Erosion Control Act. As far as the water lines, what you're looking at there in a major subdivision, the Water Authority requires as-built showing that the lines are properly installed for water and sewer. Whereas if you're dealing with an individual lot, they simply require a permit from the Water Authority as part of the building permit process. So we won't issue a building permit until the Water Authority says that particular lot is ready to go. Same with erosion control. If they've got erosion control issues, we won't let them proceed until they correct them.
Okay. So even though the language sort of sounds like you're ignoring it, there are other ways in which those items, as you said, are going to be controlled.
I don't want to use the word ignore, but we are putting it aside on the minor subdivisions because they may not be building immediately. We don't want to hold them to a standard that they're not looking to start construction immediately. If they do begin construction, then they have to provide the documentation that we need to go forward.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
I've got one more. Can I go ahead and say mine? Mine's just short and sweet. For the record, it's not being done for me because I went through the process. I paid the money. I did everything according to, correct?
That is correct.
Just want to be sure that it's not put out in public that Bowman needed something, so he went in and had it done. No, I went through all the hoops. I paid all the money, and I did it exactly as we were instructed to do, correct?
That is correct. Yours went through a full
Thank
final
you.
plat review.
Thank you. I just wanted that for the record. Thanks.
Mr. Holder, did you have another comment or
I
question?
do. This is just a comment. I know I've spoken to Bert, to Michael, basically everybody on the staff over the years, and if I say anything wrong, please correct me if I'm wrong. But prior to the ULDC, there was a 3 split. You couldn't split it but 3 times. Okay, let's go back just a few years. I'm talking about 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, during the boom times. And, Mr. Bowman, let's go one step further on what you've just encountered. I know there have been times that staff has taken the approach that, no, that you can't split this 3 times because it's already been split. Well, every piece of property, and my contention is that every piece of property in this country, in this world, has been subdivided at some point in time. So where do you draw the line? But it was 3 is all the splits that you could get off of a piece of property. Is that not correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
In a certain period of time.
Every 5 years.
Every 5 years, that's what I thought. I thought there was a time to it.
Okay. 3 splits in 5 years. Okay, let's go to the next generation, Commissioner Bowman, and as an example is what we have faced. Back in a few years ago, there were larger tracts of land. Say a guy had a 100-acre tract of property, and he split it 4 ways with 4 children. Then, after the 5-year period, they wanted to split it again so that they could give to their 3 to 4 children. Then the staff, in the way the ordinance was written, they could not split it. Is that not correct?
You can split a parcel one time every 5 years, but nothing precludes you from taking that one parcel that you split and you split into another parcel, and then that parcel being split previously 3 more times. Does that make sense?
It's not what y'all had told some of the people that came before you, because that's the reason for the concern. Now, in the county's defense, in the defense of the ordinance as written, and Mr. Foster touched on it briefly, as we start to split and we take 4 splits, then 8 splits, then 16 splits, all of a sudden you have an environmental issue or the possibility of drainage issues, and certainly we can't have that. So that's the purpose for it. I mean, that's the reason the county takes part of the position that they take. The 5 versus 3 is an improvement. Jumping through the hoops is still a problem, but I don't know how you're going to avoid it, because it's something that we have to look at as far as environmental issues, because what would happen if your neighbor next door, you all of a sudden, he's had a good piece of property, and we've had some of this, as we all know, and now 4 houses are in, and all of a sudden somebody's getting flooded downstream. These things happen, and there has to be some control, but I'm proud to see it go up from 3 to 5, and I don't believe it's always been you could split it every 5 years.
No, sir.
It was originally.
It has not, has it?
No, sir. It was originally only 3, and then, like you said, there was the problem deciding when those 3 splits occurred.
That's right.
I want to say in 2002 or 2003, they added the 5-year window. And what was happening is we were having essentially subdivisions being split out over time, cropping up on substandard roads, fire hydrants. The roads weren't meant for that kind of traffic, and nobody was bringing them up to standard as we would make a developer do who was building an R2 subdivision.
Believe me, I had quite a few in my
Yes, sir,
area
you did.
because of the roads that existed there at that time, and many developers at that time would go in and buy property, get the splits off the property for the frontage property, get their money to develop off of the lots that they could sell along the road before they ever started to cut the infrastructure in behind them. Following, not just in District 1, but all over the county, you saw that occurring. So that's why it had to be looked at, but I'm proud to see it at least proceed to where we are in this one.
Madam Chair. Let me make one comment, 1 second, Michael. I know when I first read this, I was kind of blown away that we put in a status between a minor and a major. When I first read it, I thought, that's kind of weird, but I know in the past when people would take a subdivision, let's say, for instance, the Airline Road, a guy would take a piece of, and I'm using Airline Road because that's where I live, but and there's a dirt road off the side of the airline road, he would punch the road in off of airline because it was paved. But on the side of the dirt road, he might have 5 or 6 acres over there. He would go around the side and put 3 houses on there to meet the criteria without having to pave the road, correct?
Yes, sir.
He'd be able, all he had to do was put water over there, and he could meet the criteria of putting those 3 houses over there. But if a guy had a 100-acre tract, let's say there's a large, big tracts, especially in District 3, that's undeveloped. Guy has 100-acre estate lots out there for his family. He's got 5 boys, same scenario. He divides that out to 10 acres, and he meets the criteria, the minimum road frontage, he has water out there, and he has asphalt in front of these lots. Is he in all reality creating a small subdivision? I don't think he is. And I don't think that's anybody's intent, to create status small subdivision. And you're putting requirements on a small subdivision that basically, in a sense, he's required to name the subdivision because it's a subdivision, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
I mean, if you're going to do the number, I don't think 5's the number, my personal opinion. That's just my opinion. A small subdivision to me is just my opinion, would be a 20-plus lot where you got a guy. But this criteria, especially in some of the rural areas in District 1 and District 3 where there's still large tracts of land, just because a guy subdivides his piece of property and gives his family 10 acres on a paved road with water, and he does that 5 times, creates a small subdivision. I beg to differ. I don't think that's the case. That's just my opinion, and I know y'all are following some requests. When I first read this, I thought, where did this request even come from? And I know y'all simply following up requests that somebody asked you to bring before the board, so that's just my comment. Well, I don't think you mentioned it down there.
It brought an issue to light that probably has, and that's the thing with the ULDC is, as we've adopted it and we've gone through it over the months, those little things keep cropping up over time.
But the biggest criteria is how many times you can subdivide a piece of property on a paved road, because you're going to be limited on the dirt road anyway.
And under your scenario that you just presented on Airline Road, if that neighbor divided it more than 3 times, not only would he have to final plat it, but he would have to bring that dirt road up to county standards. And that's, 80-foot right-of-way, utilities in place, the whole thing, just for doing the 4 lots.
Think about this now. You got a family, a 6th-generation family that lives about a mile and a half from you, coming out of your driveway going to the right. And they want all the kids and the grandkids to live on the piece of property, and it's 250 acres.
Right.
You're going to require him to create a subdivision just for his family.
Just produce a minor subdivision plat, not have to go through what a traditional R2 subdivision developer would have to do.
Well, he's not doing R2, so
exactly.
But
or
he could
an
be
RA
doing
subdivision.
state-size lots,
Right.
or an RA subdivision. But he's not meeting the criteria under either one of those because he's doing a 5 to 10 acre lot.
Right, but what I'm saying, the ULDC doesn't make any distinction right now. That's what we're trying to create, is a distinction between what you're talking about and a distinction between what the residential
And I
developer.
understand that, but I don't think 5's the number. That's just my opinion. And I know y'all simply following up on a request. I'm not beating up on y'all. I just wondered where the request came from, and maybe Mr. Bowman was the one that shined a little light on it. I don't know, but...
Well, I didn't ask, for the record, I didn't ask
I understand.
for the 5. I went through the hoops. I did everything I was supposed to do. I just did not agree with the fact that I had to do that to give property to my kids so that they could live on the same piece of property I lived on.
Exactly.
I thought that was ridiculous. I'll just be honest with you. I thought.
Well, we have a couple of options because it sounds like there's still a few concerns. We can move forward with this item today and vote it up or down, or you can ask the staff to go back and maybe look at it and review it a little bit more to see if some of the questions and concerns you expressed here can be addressed.
Michael has a comment. Sorry.
County Attorney, we're just saying, you probably open up for public hearing as well as public announcement. But I also wanted to clarify something from Commissioner Holder. I didn't want to give the impression for the public that the soil erosion issues are not being addressed. As Bert kind of mentioned, that when they pull their individual home permits, they are required to meet the soil erosion requirements, and those elements are being checked at that time. There's a catch-all phrase that's kind of included in the ordinance. I think we can add some language that simply states that all lots and any remaining tracts shall comply with and be consistent with all applicable requirements and development standards, including but not limited to soil and erosion control measures. Just to make sure that's specific, people clearly understand that we are not foregoing those requirements, but they are being addressed at a later time.
Okay, could I respond to that? I understand the comment, and that certainly wasn't what I was trying to convey. The point is, when we do it individually on individually platted lots, it is not a
Consistent.
like a subdivision erosion control plan that goes into play. Totally different. So when you have a combination of those individual plans, the guy downstream can still have impact, where with an erosion control plan where detention ponds and what have you are put into place, the impact might not be as great.
That's true.
That's the point that I was trying to make.
And Chairman Mathis, one thing we did before we brought this recommendation to the board is check with other jurisdictions, and the number 5 was pretty much custom across the board. We could not find any jurisdiction that called 3-lot divisions a major or minor subdivision, so we knew that we needed to change it. But 5 was the number. I do think in Spalding County, maybe 10 was the number, but I can certainly research that and kind of give you all an idea of what the other counties are, what their numbers are.
All right, this is a public hearing. Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to speak in reference to this particular item? All right, if not, I'll look to the board. As I said, we have several options. You can vote this up, you can vote this down, you can send it back for more consideration based on some of your comments. So I will look to a board member to make some kind of motion on this item.
Move to table.
Okay, we have a motion to table this item. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Bowman. All in favor? Motion carries 5-0.
Okay. Do you have a specific date that you want us to bring it back, or?
Do you feel comfortable?
Gotcha. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, moving on, we have another public hearing, an ordinance amendment to amend Chapter 4, Table 4.03.01, Standards for Commercial Kennels for the purpose of clarifying supplemental standards in accordance with Section 12.02.11 and 12.03.00 of the Henry County Unified Land Development Code. And again, our presenter is Sherry Hobson Matthews, and that's Exhibit Number 12.
Okay, good morning again, Chairman Mathis and Commissioners. The request before you this morning is a recap from the item that we discussed on yesterday regarding commercial kennels and the minimum lot size requirements for individuals who want to utilize their properties for such business. After yesterday's meeting, staff kind of regrouped to kind of see if we could come back with some other answers based on some questions that we received on yesterday. We did contact the Animal Division for the Georgia Department of Agriculture, and we were told that the Department of Ag actually issues a license before the county will issue any type of license. So if I were a commercial kennel holder, then I would have to obtain my license from the Department of Ag first, then take that license to the county for issuance of any building permits, business licenses, or any other type of permits. So at that point, the Department of Ag has already done their inspection and has found that the property is in compliance in order to issue that license. One other thing that we checked was to see if there were any regulations on minimum lot size requirements, minimum square footage requirements, and we pulled the Georgia Animal Protection Act, and there are no regulations that we can find that dictates a commercial kennel having to meet a certain minimum floor area or minimum acreage. So I hope that kind of answers some of the questions, but if not, I'll certainly be happy to go back and research anything further.
City Board Member, Mr. Holder.
One of the concerns that I had was the amount of space required. Did the Department of Agriculture require a minimum or a number on the square footage of a run for a commercial kennel? And that was one of the concerns I had because of the square footage of the actual leased space versus what was available to him. And if there was some, I would have thought there would have been some sort of requirement. I don't know.
And we haven't, and again, we spoke with someone at the Department of Ag and even pulled their regulations, and there is nothing within their regulations that we can find. I do know that they do, based on the license that they issue, they regulate the number of pets. So that may be the only thing, and I'm not really sure, but that was all that they were able to provide us on yesterday afternoon.
I could see where you would want to cap the number of animals that you would be containing, more so than the actual building size. So the building would dictate how many animals you actually could contain.
I can understand that, but also as far as exercise, and we know how that plays into animals.
Well, a lot of these people want to do the indoor daycare, and that's kind of what the facilities that this is going after, I think.
I understand. Yeah. Okay.
Any other questions or comments on this? Mr. Arletta?
Yesterday, we got into discussing lease space and all that type of stuff. I understood from what I read, and I just read it again, when all these requirements of space, if you would, that are in here, it's land space, it's not lease space.
That is correct.
So when I read square footage, that is square footage of the land that the building is on, not the square footage of the lease space within it.
That is correct.
That's what I thought. Okay, just wanted to clarify.
Any other questions or comments? If not, this is a public hearing, so I'd ask if there's anyone in the audience who wishes to speak in reference to this particular item. Okay. If not, the board has before them an ordinance to amend Chapter 4, Table 4.03.01E, Standards for Commercial Kennels for the purpose of clarifying supplemental standards and for other purposes, and I will entertain a motion.
So moved.
We have a motion to approve by Mr. Arletta. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Holmes. All in favor? Motion carries 5-0. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, moving on, we have a resolution to enact a moratorium. Our presenter is Sherry Hobson Matthews, Planning and Zoning Director, and that's handout number 1.
Good morning, Chairman and Commissioners. As Chairman Mathis has indicated, this morning I stand before you with representatives from the Fire Department and our Police Department. Over the course of maybe the last 2 or 3 months, Planning and Zoning, Business License, Code Enforcement, Fire Department, and the Police Department has met continuously regarding the use of facilities for teen gatherings and parties. What we realize is that we have no regulations or provisions currently in our ordinance to regulate those type of parties. What we've done in the past, it's pretty much been word of mouth, and we found out about the party, and once we find out, we're able to contact the property owner and make them aware that at this point, they would need to come in for a special event permit. A lot of times we find out maybe 3 days before the event, so there's not ample amount of time for us actually to go out, do inspections, make sure that the police department has proper security at the facility. So what we're trying to do is enact this moratorium so that we can come back and study what needs to happen within our county and how we should regulate. Lieutenant Gray, Chief Kelly, and another representative from the police department is here, and they're going to come up and kind of give you all the technical aspects of it, and then I'll come back up if you all have any further questions.
Thank you.
Good morning. How are y'all?
Good morning.
As you know, the police department is charged with ensuring the safety of the county and looking after its citizens. The gang unit came across some information in early January pertaining to a large teen club that was going to kick off on West Ridge Parkway. Early in the month, we met with Planning and Zoning and denied the special event permit. That weekend, they chose to have it at another location on McDonough Parkway. We estimated, you'll see by the picture here, over 500 teens, flip it around, over 500 teens inside this location. The gang unit using undercover vehicles observed gang members from the Crips, the Bloods, the Gangster Disciples, the use of illegal narcotics, underage drinking. So along with Major Ammerman and Chief Nichols, they authorized us to go in with the fire department and shut it down because they didn't have the proper permits, the codes, or anything else going on at the party. We went in and used over 20 officers, the Special Operations Division and some of the SWAT team members just to clear this out, shut it down. Businesses along that parkway had at least 100, 150 cars in it. And it took, we had a total cost to the county just for the 3 hours that we were out there, over $2,000 in overtime that we paid
to make sure, because some of these children were under 16, so then it's our responsibility as law enforcement officers to make sure they get home to their parents. So we, at the police department, fully support this moratorium. There were people from outside the county were mostly what we were seeing. I won't get into specifics how the gang unit finds out. They do it through investigation and confidential informants, but it seems to have worked in this case when we shut them down. And it was for profit. They were charging the undercovers that were there that night. I heard them say that we're full to capacity, and we've gone from $10 to $30 a head to get them in there. So that's where we're at. I'll let I'm sorry. There was fights inside. They had provided their own security, if you will. It was two gentlemen dressed in all black, and they said there'd been a lot of fights inside there. I heard some other, since it's a public forum, when we were there, because I was personally there too, as we were getting them to leave, the children using profanity and other sort of stuff towards the police when we were getting them out of there.
How many arrests did you make?
We made none that night. We felt it was better to go ahead and secure the event, get the people home safely. Now, once they started getting in the outlying areas, that's when the call started coming in from the Kroger on Jonesboro Road. I remember specifically the McDonald's where there was fights, but by the time we got over there, they were gone. We knew that we were going to have that issue, but we didn't make any that night.
Which sites will be included in the moratorium? Will it just be facilities? Would it be public parks or any place public?
It'll include any facility within the county and then any facilities that are currently zoned non-residential. And you bring up a good question in that there are already existing event facilities in the county. This will not preclude those event facilities from having events, but it will preclude them from having teen parties and teen gatherings. So if they're using the event facilities for weddings or anything else, they can still do that. But as far as teen parties, gatherings, party halls for teenagers, that will all have to cease.
Mr. Bowman?
On Eagles Landing Parkway, there's one called Party Center. I've gotten a number of calls about teens there, about drug use in the parking lot, about all sorts of activities going on. I've actually asked the chief, once or twice to have somebody take a look at it. I'm sure you probably have.
Yes, sir.
But that's one. Will we be able to put a stop to them having it until we can get to this? I mean, it's called Party Center. It's a large
Party Hall 3.
Event center, they can still have regular events like banquets and weddings. However, teen functions specifically directed towards teens would be prohibited with this moratorium.
Well, that's good, because we need to do something there, because right there on Eagles Landing Parkway, I mean, there's a lot of lewd acts going on out in the parking lot, and a lot of fighting. I've gotten a lot of calls about it, and I really didn't know what we could do about it. I'd asked the chief, and I'm sure you guys have been there on more than one occasion. So
yes, sir. We've been there 3 or 4 times. Special Operations Division. Now, we never saw any of the fights out in the parking lots, but we have made arrests there for drug use.
Well, that's good. That was all I want to be sure of, is that we can stop them from having the teen parties until we can get something established there.
And Michael and I discussed this morning before coming into the meeting. Because it's a moratorium, we don't advertise it. So what we're going to do is work with our business license office to send out some type of certified letter to make all event facilities aware that we now have this moratorium in place, and that if they plan on utilizing the facility for teen parties, then they will be in violation of the moratorium. So we will make sure that they are all aware and contacted that this moratorium is in place. One thing that's real critical, and I know Lieutenant Gray brought it up, is a number of the teenagers that are participating in these parties are not Henry County residents. They come as far as Butts, Jackson, Spalding, Fulton, DeKalb, Clayton, all over. And we've witnessed and looked at quite a few YouTube videos that I literally dropped my mouth and could not believe that these functions were actually occurring in the county. The sad part about it is we get a number of requests probably weekly through the Planning and Zoning Office to have events such as this. And the challenge is telling people that you don't have regulations in place. And their argument back to me is, well, that means I can do it. So I certainly hope that you all can support this so that we can get standards in place. I will tell you that the City of Stockbridge already has an ordinance in place that we're certainly going to look at that really has a lot of teeth in it, but we certainly want to make sure that we check with surrounding jurisdictions. We're going to look outside the state because it is a growing problem, and we certainly want to make sure that we protect the students and individuals that are participating, but we also want to make sure that we're not liable as a county in allowing these type of events to go on without any regulations.
If someone, in spite of the moratorium, determines they're going to go ahead and host one of these events, what are the consequences associated with that?
That's certainly a good question.
If someone was hosting an event without a permit, because the permit would not be issued because there was a moratorium, then they would be cited for violating the county's ordinance because they would not have a proper permit for that event.
And what is the punitive?
It's magistrate court. It's a violation of our ordinance. They go to magistrate court.
With a fine up to how much?
That's a good question, Chairman. It cannot be in excess of $1,000 if it's not specified in the ordinance. State law says the county ordinance violations can't exceed $1,000. But there may already be a specific amount specified in the ordinance for that, and I just don't know that sitting here.
With some of the ordinances that we have that are state ordinances, we can take them to the state court, which the fines will be. With this particular party here, we are issuing citations on it because they did do it illegally. They were overcrowding, they were blocking exits, and the lady that is leasing the building doesn't even have a CO on the building, so we are issuing her citations on that with us in code enforcement. And under our code, we can get up to $1,000 and/or 60 days in jail on each offense, depending on what the judge decides.
I mean, just looking at the sheer numbers from that first photograph that you showed, I could see all kinds of tragic consequences to a gathering like that. And that's horrible to think someone can do that and just say, well, here's a citation, don't do it again, because that's criminal, in my opinion, to subject these kids to that kind of danger.
Chief Kelly has the ability to shut them down on site, so he can go in.
That's what we did this evening, that they had this. This group here was actually the one that was denied on West Ridge, and the little promoter had some guys stand out at West Ridge and send everybody to McDonough Parkway. So not only is the tenant getting rode up, but he's being rode up too.
Very good.
And they're advertising this through the high schools, through our intelligence. We came across a card, a little laminated card that we were finding in the high schools. I have a child that goes to Ola High School, and he even knew about it. So.
Mr. Arletta?
Can you say where this location is that held this? What is the location?
This location here was 401 McDonough Parkway.
And what type of business, or is it just a vacant building, or what?
Nitro Elite Cheerleading is what it was called. It's next to the skate park, if you drive down.
And I will tell you, there is not an active business license for that existing business. So they were actually utilizing the facility with a business license that had already been denied by the Planning and Zoning Department.
And they are, as you said, being pursued for fines and...
Yes, sir.
Okay. I noticed this has video production at the top of it. Was this videoed? Is there video of the event?
YouTube videos, and what they did is that after this happened, through some of the ways that we get our intelligence in the gang unit, we were able to pull these off before they shut them down. The very next day, the gang unit was in and they took it down. They viewed the YouTube video, tried to get it saved, and within minutes they had it shut down where you couldn't get back to it. Not technical savvy enough to figure out how you get in to do that. So.
A question for the county attorney, and that is, to the extent that I have, someone has, because I don't, but someone has a business license to have an events facility, and then we put a moratorium on them as to the types of events they can hold after they've already been granted this license, can they, or are we in our right legal state to go ahead and put a moratorium on something they may have previously been allowed to have, such as a teen? Not that I want this not to go through, but can we be sued by somebody after this moratorium goes in that says you can't take away the rights that I already had to have a teen event at a facility that I have a business license already granted for?
Moratoriums are allowed to place temporary restrictions on otherwise allowable rights that a person may have. And I noticed there's a recommendation for 120 days. I would urge staff to shorten that to the extent possible and work on getting it back before y'all so that there won't be an undue hardship on property owners. But we're allowed, based on compelling public health, safety, welfare reasons, to place those restrictions even on otherwise
Okay,
legal
so
rights.
I guess I was just going to use a ridiculous example and say that we put a moratorium on weddings, instead of teens. You're saying, again, the qualifications or the criteria you just mentioned that were established for this allow the moratorium, or it'd be sort of silly to say you're going to be able to do it for a wedding.
If weddings were found to cause public health, safety,
Right.
welfare concerns, and if there was a large problem with that throughout the
Right.
county, then in your legislative judgment, you could make that determination.
That's what I was saying. There are criteria and they've been met, and therefore the specifics of teens is specifically met by that criteria.
Yes,
That's what I
yes,
wanted to
sir.
cover. Thank
Yes,
you.
sir.
Mr. Holder?
I support what you're saying completely, but I think we have to look and add some language, and I'd ask the county attorney's help on this one. We're talking about a 120-day moratorium. What season does that get us into? Think about it, the junior, senior proms and the various other things. This does not distinguish on the it just says teen gatherings, period. So I don't know if you can add an exemption for school-sponsored activities or for whatever the reason, but I'm sure there are some facilities within our county that would be used by some school, as many schools as we have, for some sort of junior, senior prom or graduation purposes. So my point is, I think there needs to be some language added possibly for school-sponsored activities, not like when it goes into the school and the school doesn't endorse that activity, but it just infiltrates the school. But if we don't, I think we'll actually be sending some of our students maybe outside of the county into harm's way more than taking care of them. And many of the schools are starting to look at that and come back home for some of these parties rather than going into town or to wherever for that purpose. So, but the way this is written, it doesn't say that. It just says any type of team gathering, function, or party in non-residential zone property. Well, that means the Merle Mandel Center or the Event Center or any of the, even the county centers would not be qualified to hold a gathering such as that during this moratorium, or you couldn't get a permit for it. That's the way I read it. Am I reading it wrong?
Incorrectly. I think there are two ways to address your concern, your very valid concern. One is to shorten the moratorium period. It maybe 45 days, 60 days would be sufficient for our staff to come up with a good ordinance or some regulations to bring back to you all, as opposed to 120 days, which would get us into that critical period that you mentioned. A second alternative would be to put insert language relating to school-related functions. You can do that as an alternative or in addition to shortening the moratorium period. 120 days is 4 months. That's a long time, and maybe for such a discrete issue, you may not need that amount of time. I'm not sure, Sherry. Certainly I want to invade on your province and your judgment on that issue. But
You probably need to insert county or school, because if you got really technical, a baseball game between 14 and 15-year-olds could be construed as a teen gathering. That affects our parks and rec. So.
that's right.
Now, on page 2 of the actual moratorium, there is a now therefore be it resolved number 1. And the last sentence states, "This moratorium shall not be applicable to church, government, or school activities or functions when located on church, government, or school premises."
I didn't read far enough, but,
I was trying to jump in.
see, we didn't have it but this morning, so I didn't have time to read it. I'm a slow reader.
And I guess the concern, the only difference in what you were saying is that it's limited to school premises. So if it's anything that's a school activity and it's off of the school premises or outside of the school premises, that may pose a problem. But if it's a government...
I think if it was school-sponsored, then the school would be responsible for it, period. And then they would, I think it needs to, my thinking is it needs to have school-sponsored activity. And if they may elect to have a school-sponsored activity at Merle Manda's, or they may have it at wherever. But at least it is a school-sponsored activity and not one that is for profit by some individual.
And county staff certainly agrees with the county attorney on the time frame. I most certainly think we could get back in 60 days with some type of recommendation to the commissioners. And I think 120 has just been the norm, but we certainly understand that we don't want to affect the business owners that may already have licenses out there. So 60 days is certainly amenable by all of us standing here.
Well, certainly if we do 60, there's nothing that says that it cannot be extended.
That's correct.
And it's not the first time this board has extended a moratorium, but at least in 60 days, you'll find out what the climate out there is and find out how much resistance you're getting to a moratorium period.
Absolutely.
Are there any further questions or comments pertaining to this item? All right, if not, you have before you a resolution with amended language that we discussed here for a moratorium for a 60-day period, and I'll entertain a motion. Motion by Mr. Bowman, second by Mr. Holder. All in, I'm sorry.
60-day period, but would you
Yeah.
insert the school activities?
Yeah, with the amended language.
With the amended language?
Yeah.
With the amended language. I move to approve.
School-sponsored activities.
School-sponsored activities, right?
Yes.
And we've covered a lot of that under that one paragraph.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have a motion to approve the 60 days with the amended school activities language by Mr. Bowman. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Holder. All in favor? Motion carries 5-0. Thank you. Thank you. The next item on the agenda is approval of the minutes for December 19th and 20th. These are regular meetings. Is there any additions or changes other than grammatical? If not, I'll entertain a motion to approve. Motion by Mr. Holder, second by Mr. Bowman. All in favor? Motion carries 5-0. The next item on the agenda is an appointment to the Park and Recreation Board by Commissioner Holder.
Madam Chair, first of all, I want to thank Carla Daniel for her service as the representative to the Recreation Board for Henry County. Her work schedule has changed so that she will not be able to continue to serve. I do want to thank her for the years that she has served and for the accomplishments that she's made. So that created a vacancy on the board, and I would like to appoint Tommy Mitchell of 401 Appling Way, McDonough, Georgia, to be the representative to the Rec Board from District 1.
All right, we have a motion on the floor to appoint Tommy Mitchell, and is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Bowman. All in favor? Motion carries 5-0. Did anyone sign up for public comments? County manager, anything for public session?
No, ma'am.
Ms. County Attorney?
No, ma'am.
Upcoming meetings and events, Tuesday, February 7th at 1 p.m., we have a called public workshop meeting. Monday, February the 13th, I guess tentatively, are we going to cancel these meetings? Did we determine that, or we'll make that decision today as far as the called public workshop meetings?
For next Monday?
The budgets, yeah.
I would say you would probably, don't you have to come back and to leave this meeting? Can we make that decision after we talk
We can
about
do
the
that.
budget?
I'll go ahead and make the announcement, and then we can make that determination if we determine. Okay. I'll go ahead and announce the meetings. We can change that when we come back from executive session. Tuesday, February 7th, 1 p.m., called public workshop meeting. Monday, February the 13th, Friday, February the 17th, are both called, one's at 9:30, one's at 8:30, called public workshop meetings. Monday, February the 20th is President's Day and a furlough day. Tuesday, February 21st at 6:30 p.m., we have a regular board meeting. At this time, I do need a motion to convene into executive session for the purposes of potential pending litigation, personnel, and land acquisition matters. Motion by Mr. Stamey, second by Mr. Arletta. All in favor? Motion carries 5-0. Ready? I need a motion to reconvene into public session. Motion by Mr. Stamey, second by Mr. Holmes. All in favor? Motion carries 5-0. I need a motion for an approval of an affidavit and resolution pertaining to executive session. Motion by Mr. Stamey, second by Mr. Holmes. All in favor? Motion carries 5-0. At this time, we need to amend the agenda. Commissioner Bowman?
Madam Chair, I'd like to make a motion to amend the agenda to deny the appeal of Cornelius Webster.
And we have a motion on the floor to amend the agenda and deny the appeal of Cornelius Webster by Commissioner Bowman. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Holder. All in favor? Motion carries 5-0. If there's no further business for this board, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Motion by Mr. Bowman, second by Mr. Stamey. All in favor? Motion carries 5-0. We stand adjourned.